There's a residential street where housing prices increased by more than 40% over 3 years. During that period, nothing was built on the street. No homes were renovated, no services were added, no infrastructure was improved. The street looked the same at the end of the period as it had at the beginning. The increase happened anyway. This should not occur in the way housing markets are typically understood. Value is supposed to follow improvement. Prices rise when something is added: new construction, better schools, upgraded transit, commercial development nearby. When none of these things happen, prices are expected to remain stable or decline. On this street, they rose significantly while the physical environment remained identical. The contradiction is not explained by the street itself. Nothing about the street changed. The explanation exists somewhere else entirely. The homes that sold during this period were not better than the homes that had sold before. The buyers who purchased them were not wealthier than previous buyers. The street did not become safer or more attractive or more convenient. It became more expensive. That is the only change that occurred. When a place increases in value without visible cause, the assumption is that something hidden has changed, that infrastructure improvements are planned, that development is coming, that information exists that would explain the increase. On this street, none of these things were true. No plans existed. No information was withheld. The increase occurred in the absence of reason. This kind of change is difficult to accept because it suggests that value is not tied to reality. That prices can move independent of the things prices are supposed to measure. That a place can be worth more without being worth more. The street is evidence that this can happen, that it does happen, that the mechanisms which determine what a place costs do not require that place to change at all. Before prices began to rise, the street was unremarkable. It consisted of single-family homes built several decades earlier, modest in size and design. The lots were standard. The landscaping was minimal. Most homes had driveways and small front yards. The street was paved and maintained but showed typical signs of age. Sidewalks were cracked in places. Trees were mature but not particularly notable. The houses themselves were variations on a limited set of designs. Ranch-style homes with attached garages, split-level homes with small porches, a few two-story colonials. The exteriors were vinyl siding or brick. The colors were muted: beige, gray, pale yellow. Nothing stood out. Nothing was meant to stand out. The street had been developed during a period when the goal was efficiency and affordability, not distinction. The residents were long-term owners, retirees, and younger families who had purchased when prices were lower. Turnover was infrequent. People knew their neighbors by name but did not organize socially around the street itself. It was a place to live, not a place people spoke about living. Conversations happened in driveways and at mailboxes. Children played in yards. Someone mowed their lawn on weekends. Someone else put up holiday decorations. The rhythms were ordinary and predictable. The surrounding area was similar. The neighborhood had no defining characteristics. It was not close to the city center. It was not especially far from it either. Commute times were average. The schools were adequate. There were grocery stores and gas stations within driving distance. A small commercial strip with a dry cleaner and a sandwich shop. A park with a playground and a basketball court. Everything necessary was present. Nothing exceptional was present. The street existed in a category that might be described as functional. It met needs without exceeding them. People who lived there generally did so because they could afford to and because it was convenient enough. Not because they had chosen the street specifically. Not because they felt attached to it in a meaningful way. It was a reasonable place to be. No one expected the street to change. There were no planned developments, no rezoning proposals, no public investment announcements. The area had been stable for years. Property values increased slowly, in line with inflation and regional trends, but never dramatically. The street seemed likely to continue in this state indefinitely. A place where people lived uneventfully until they moved somewhere else or stayed until they no longer could. Over the 3-year period, no new homes were constructed on the street. No existing homes were torn down and replaced. No additions were built. No major renovations took place. Exteriors remained the same. Roofs were not replaced. Siding was not updated. Windows were not changed. The homes that had looked worn before the price increases looked equally worn after. The homes that had been well-maintained remained well-maintained but were not improved beyond their previous condition. No one installed solar panels. No one added a second story. No one converted garages or finished basements in ways that would have been visible from the outside. The physical structures were static. No public infrastructure was improved. The street itself was not repaved. The same potholes that had existed at the beginning of the period still existed at the end. No new streetlights were installed. No utilities were upgraded. Water and sewer lines remained as they had been. Power lines were unchanged. Internet service was the same. The speed had not increased. The reliability had not improved. The infrastructure that supported daily life on the street was identical to what it had been years earlier. No services were added to the area. The nearest schools did not improve in rating or reputation. Test scores remained consistent. Teacher retention remained consistent. Funding remained consistent. No new transit lines were introduced. No bus routes were added. The commute to the city center took the same amount of time it had always taken. Traffic patterns were unchanged. No parks were developed nearby. No commercial areas opened within walking distance. The small strip of businesses remained the same. One shop closed, another opened selling similar products. The net effect was zero. The street received no attention. It was not featured in local media. It was not highlighted by real estate publications. It was not mentioned in development plans or zoning discussions. No demographic shifts occurred on the street itself. The same people continued living there. The same number of homes remained occupied. Vacancy rates did not change. Crime rates did not change. Nothing that would typically signal transformation occurred. Everything that typically drives housing price increases was absent. The street was static. It was not improving. It was not declining. It was continuing in the exact state it had been in before prices began to rise. The homes were the same age. The infrastructure was the same age. The services were the same. The only thing that changed was what people were willing to pay to live there, and that change had nothing to do with the street itself. Elsewhere in areas closer to the city center and in neighborhoods with established reputations, housing prices had been rising for years. The increases were gradual at first, then accelerated. Homes that had been accessible to middle-income buyers became inaccessible. Renters faced higher costs. People who had planned to buy in certain areas began looking elsewhere. The areas where prices rose first were the areas that had always been desirable, close to downtown, near universities. In districts with historic architecture or cultural amenities, these places had been expensive for decades, but the gap between their prices in surrounding areas had been manageable. That gap widened. What had been a 20% difference became a 50% difference, then a 100% difference. The places that had always been expensive became prohibitively expensive. The pressure did not remain contained. As prices rose in desirable areas, buyers expanded their search perimeters. Streets that had previously been ignored began appearing in online searches. Neighborhoods that had never been considered became options. The definition of reasonable distance changed. What had been too far became acceptable. What had been undesirable became tolerable. The criteria shifted because the alternatives disappeared. Buyers who would have preferred to live closer to the center began looking at homes 20 minutes farther out, then 30 minutes, then 40. The street fell within this expanding radius. It had not moved. The radius had moved. The street was far enough from the center to have been overlooked for years. It was close enough to become relevant once closer options became too expensive. It was not chosen because it improved. It was chosen because other places became unavailable. The street had no qualities that attracted people to it. It had the quality of being affordable relative to places people actually wanted to be. That was sufficient. This shift happened quietly. There were no announcements. No one declared the street newly desirable. No articles were written about its potential. No influencers featured it. No developers expressed interest. Buyers simply began looking at listings there because they had run out of alternatives. Real estate agents began showing homes on the street to clients who would not have considered it previously. The agents did not present the street as an opportunity. They presented it as what was available within the client's budget. The street did not attract investment. It attracted overflow. People who had been priced out of other areas arrived on the street not because they wanted to live there, but because they needed to live somewhere they could afford. The distinction is important. Investment implies intention. Overflow implies displacement. The street became a repository for demand that could not be met elsewhere. The first price increase was modest. A home sold for slightly more than comparable homes had sold for the previous year. The difference was small enough to seem like ordinary variation. The kind of fluctuation that occurs when one buyer is particularly motivated or when a home has a feature that appeals to someone specifically. No one paid attention. The second increase was larger. A home sold for noticeably more than the first. Still within a range that could be explained by market conditions or seasonal timing, but larger enough that a few people noticed. Long-term residents mentioned it to each other. Real estate agents updated their pricing models. The third increase was larger still. This one could not be explained by normal variation. The home that sold was not in better condition than previous homes. It did not have more space or a larger lot. It sold for 15% more than a nearly identical home had sold for 6 months earlier. Within 18 months, every home that sold on the street sold for significantly more than similar homes had sold for 2 years earlier. The increases were not tied to the condition of individual homes. Homes in average condition sold for high prices. Homes that needed work sold for high prices. Homes with outdated kitchens and bathrooms sold for high prices. Specific qualities of each property mattered less than the fact that the property was on the street. The pattern became clear. Buyers were not evaluating homes based on features. They were evaluating homes based on price relative to other areas. A home on the street might need updates and lack modern amenities, but it cost 30% less than a similar home closer to the city. That difference was enough. Homeowners who had lived on the street for years watched the assessed values of their homes rise. Some refinanced. They took equity out of homes they had nearly paid off and used it for other purposes. Some considered selling. They had not planned to move, but the higher prices made moving possible in ways it had not been before. Some remained uncertain about what the increase meant. Their homes were the same. The street was the same. The numbers were different. The higher values did not correspond to any change they had witnessed. New buyers arrived. They paid the higher prices because those prices were still lower than prices elsewhere. They were not buying the street. They were buying access at a cost they could manage. The street itself was incidental. Many of the new buyers had been outbid in other areas. They had tried to purchase homes closer to where they worked or closer to family or in neighborhoods they preferred. They had been unsuccessful. The street was where they ended up. There was no celebration. No one felt the street had been discovered or validated. The long-term residents did not feel proud that their homes were worth more. The new residents did not feel fortunate to have bought there. The increases felt arbitrary, detached from reality. Prices rose because other prices had risen first. The street was caught in a pattern it had no control over. Long-term residents began selling. Not all at once, but steadily. Some sold because the higher prices allowed them to move somewhere they preferred. A different state, closer to children or grandchildren, somewhere warmer or quieter or more affordable in terms of property taxes and cost of living. The increase in their home's value gave them options they had not had before. Some sold because property taxes increased with assessed values and became difficult to manage on fixed incomes. The taxes rose even though the services provided by those taxes did not improve. The schools were the same. The roads were the same. The municipal budget was the same. But the assessed value of their home had increased and the tax bill increased with it. For retirees living on savings and Social Security, the increase was not sustainable. They sold and moved somewhere less expensive. Some sold because the street no longer felt like the place they had moved to. The neighbors they had known for years were gone. New people arrived who did not stay long enough to become familiar. The informal social structure of the street dissolved. Conversations stopped happening. The sense of continuity disappeared. The street became a place they no longer recognized, even though it looked identical to how it had always looked. New residents arrived with different expectations. They had not chosen the street for its character or community. They had chosen it because it was affordable relative to other options. Their connection to the street was financial, not social. They viewed the home as an asset, a place to live while building equity, a step toward eventually moving somewhere better. They intended to stay as long as the investment made sense. The informal networks that had existed among long-term residents weakened. Fewer people knew their neighbors. Introductions became rare. People kept to themselves. No one organized block parties or neighborhood cleanups. No one knew who to call if a package was delivered to the wrong address or if a tree fell during a storm. The street became a collection of individual households with no connective tissue. The turnover increased. Homes that had been occupied by the same family for a decade or more changed hands every 2 or 3 years. Each new owner arrived with the intention of staying temporarily. The street became quieter, not in a peaceful way, in an absent way. Fewer children played outside. Fewer people sat on porches. Fewer cars were in driveways during the day. The street felt emptier even though the same number of people lived there. Children who had grown up on the street could not afford to buy homes there. Families who had expected to remain for generations reconsidered. The street had not become wealthy, it had become expensive. The distinction mattered. Wealth implies resources and stability. Expense implies cost without corresponding benefit. The street was expensive to live on now, but it offered nothing more than it had when it was affordable. People who sold often moved farther out to streets that resembled what their street had been before prices rose. Newer developments on the edge of the region, towns an hour away, places where prices had not yet increased. Some of those streets would follow the same pattern. The cycle was predictable even if the timing was not. Street looks the same now as it did before prices increased. The homes have not been updated. The infrastructure has not improved. The trees are older. The pavement shows more wear. The sidewalks have more cracks. The streetlights are the same. The utility poles are the same. A few homes have new owners who have painted exteriors or replaced mailboxes, but these are minor cosmetic changes. The fundamental character of the street is unchanged. The same driveway, the same garages, the same small front yards. Someone walking down the street now would see what someone walking down the street 5 years ago would have seen. Nothing has been added. The prices remain high. They have stabilized but have not declined. Homes sell when they are listed, though transactions take longer than they did during the period of rapid increase. The bidding wars have stopped. Homes sit on the market for weeks instead of days, but they still sell at prices far higher than they sold for before the increase began. Buyers still arrive because the street is still less expensive than areas closer to the center. The calculation that brought the previous wave of buyers continues to bring new ones. The street remains a compromise, a place people move to because other places are unavailable. The people who live on the street now are not the people who lived there 5 years ago. Most of the long-term residents have left. A few remain, mostly older homeowners who have decided not to move again. They exist as remnants of what the street used to be. The new residents do not expect to stay long-term. They talk about the street as a temporary situation, a place they will leave when they can afford something better. The street functions as a transitional space. People live there while they wait for something else to become possible. There is no shared identity. No one speaks about the street as a community. It is a collection of homes occupied by people who happen to live near each other. Neighbors do not know each other's names. No one gathers, no one organizes. The street exists as a series of isolated units. The social fabric that requires time and stability to develop has not formed and likely will not form. The turnover is too frequent, the attachment is too weak. The street continues in this form. Homes are bought and sold. People move in and move out. The prices remain higher than they were. The physical environment remains the same. The pattern is not unique to this street. It has occurred elsewhere and will occur again. Streets in other regions are experiencing the same process. Prices rise where pressure accumulates. Streets change without being touched. Value increases while everything else remains the same. The mechanisms are not mysterious. They are visible in retrospect. A place becomes expensive because nearby places became expensive first. Demand spreads outward. Streets that were ignored become relevant. prices increase even when nothing else does. The street is still there, it has not collapsed, it has not been abandoned. Cars are parked in driveways, lights turn on in windows at night, mail is delivered, trash is collected. The street functions as it always has. It simply means something different now than it did before. The difference is not visible from the outside.